All right, welcome back to our next lesson, next lesson in this unit of Enlightenment and Revolution, although this is kind of like the second half of the unit. In the first half, we focused on, well, the Enlightenment itself, the ideas, how it's inspired kind of the way the world is today, ideas we've gotten from it, ideas that we both like, and some that even we didn't like, although I focused more on the ideas that help you understood why America is the way America is, why we think the way we do, the Constitution, Declaration of Independence. So yeah, I did tailor it a bit that way, but I'm hoping it helped you individually and personally understand what it means to be an American in the wider world, where the ideas came from, and things like that. Now, that being said, I could go into the American Revolution a heck of a lot more, but again, that's something that's done in your U.S. history classes and should be done there. This being a world history class, I'm going to be focusing on the French Revolution. Now, there are other revolutions I could be going into as well. The only reason why we're not is simply time. But this is arguably the most important revolution to talk about, along with the American Revolution, because there's a lot of things that we can compare and contrast between the two. For instance, the American Revolution is seen as a success, an overall success. Little pitfalls here and there, but overall a success. French Revolution, not so much. French Revolution seemed to start out well and then went boom. Yeah, especially with things like the Reign of Terror that we're going to be getting into. So, in your notes, go ahead and start where you're at. Just a little bit of a warning on this one. I worked on this one. I worked on quite a few PowerPoints last week, trying to revamp them, getting them ready for lessons for both Modern World History class and for my U.S. Wars class. This one was, I was able to revamp the first half of it, not the last half of it. So just a word of warning. There'll be parts we get to at the last half of this, the lesson, not this video, but the other parts of this lesson, the French Revolution. I don't know how many videos this is going to be necessarily. We'll see how this goes. 2, 3, we'll see. But there'll be somewhere you're going to have to take notes off of what I'm saying. I won't have it up on the board as much. Maybe because I'm used to teaching stuff in front of the class, and I usually have other helps to go along with it. And anyways, I just apologize up front for that, but just know that you'll see a difference in how the PowerPoint works, where you're just going to have to take notes off of what I'm saying. And I'll try to follow along with things as best I can, and keeping you as informed as you need notes on this, on what I'm saying right now. I'll try to say things like that. Anyways, moving forward with the French Revolution. So first off, notice the years, 1789 to 1799, about a 10-year process. And just compare that a little bit with the American Revolution. They're very close to each other. American Revolution is essentially started, you can argue about this, but it definitively starts in 1776, especially with the signing of the Declaration of Independence. We're able to essentially win the War of Independence by about 1783, I believe. We do the Articles of Confederation. Those don't work out so well, and so we have the Constitutional Convention, then we have the Constitution of the United States signed in 1788. So just compare that to this, with the French Revolution starting in 1789. And if you're wondering if the American Revolution has any type of effect on the French Revolution, well, yes. Yes, it most definitely does. Most of the idea wait a minute, the Americans tried this out. They seem like they're getting to work. That Constitution seems like a great document. What if we could do that here in France? You did have that sentiment. Now, was it like all the American Revolution? Let's do what they did? No, it wasn't. Hopefully remember from the Enlightenment lessons beforehand, the Enlightenment itself starts in France. France was the hotbed of most of these ideas, but it was nice for them to see that, hey, somewhere else is trying this, maybe we should too. So, Now, I'm just showing a picture of these two because just kind of show you what's going on. France in the 1770s, 1780s is an absolutist country. You have King Louis XVI, and who is married to Queen Marie Antoinette. And of course, Louis is French, but Marie Antoinette is Austrian. Just to give you a little bit of context here, it was looking like France was going to become the most powerful country almost in the world. Other countries are getting afraid of this. France and Austria had been enemies for hundreds of years, and all of a sudden now you have this political marriage with this political alliance between the two. It seemed like things were on the up and up for the monarchy. But, well, of course, when we talk about French Revolution, that's not the case. But I'm showing them because these are the guys who are in charge. There's more stories I actually like to tell about them in class, but I'm going to refrain from that here with the video lesson. But from our perspective looking back, these two become very kind of tragic characters through the course of the French Revolution. So essentially they both get killed. And, were their deaths deserved? Were their lives where they deserved kind of the antagonism and the hatred and the vitriol that they received? In some cases, maybe, but especially in the case of Louis XVI, he seemed to be a guy who really wanted his country to do well, but was stuck in the role of being a king. Anyways, I'll come back to that a little bit later, but do you need to know of the power structure of France and the going on here? Also, along with the power structure of France, is you understand the social class system. This is a social class system that dates to, it's from the age of feudalism, the medieval times. You still have this medieval structure of doing things that's been around for 1,000 years. And, in medieval times we call it feudalism. Here they call it the three estates. So just to explain what the three estates are. The first estate, religion, the Catholic Church, essentially, and the power that they have over the country. We talked a bit about that during our last year in the Age of Absolutism. But more so, leading into the revolution itself, the revolution hasn't happened yet, but we're getting to it. Look at that. It should say less than 1% of the population. Sorry about that. Yet they control 10% of the land. If you remember from last unit as well, land is the ultimate form of wealth. So the church is quite wealthy in the country of France. When we talk about 10% of land, that's in the case of, that's including things like cemeteries, but of course they have their own farms, monasteries, abbeys, cathedrals, and all the land around about it, and then other land that even is a little bit more on the economic side. 10%, that's quite a bit for less than 1% of the population. Now, I'm not saying this is the idea that it shouldn't be that way. It's just the way it was. So people see this, who has the wealth type thing. For the most part, people were okay with that. For the most part, it's the church. So second estate is essentially the nobility. Now another name, and I should have written this up here. I apologize when I was fixing the PowerPoint. Term for the second estate or nobility is aristocracy. We'll be using that word quite a bit. So whenever you hear the term aristocracy, aristocrat, we're talking about people who were second estate, who are or were second estate. Definitely the most powerful. The king belongs to the second estate, essentially, although he could claim first estate with divine right, but anyway, he's not going to get in there. But definitely your nobles, aristocracy, 2% of the population, about 70% of the land. Again, they're the ones that wield all the power in France. They're the ones that make decisions. Now, they're good aristocrats. Yeah, really good ones. Great people, and people that people like to have be in charge of their areas. Were there bad ones? Most definitely there are bad ones. And it's always the bad ones that seem to get the spotlight. Now, third estate is just everybody else. Now, I name things here: peasants, artisans, bourgeoisie, or bourgeois, French term for middle class. That's something brand new that I need to explain right now. The bourgeois is a class that came out because of the commercial revolution. These are people who wouldn't have been significant or rich in the first place if you didn't have the commercial revolution and this new wealth that's coming up. Bankers, traders, merchants, shopkeepers that aren't just having little shops in a town now. They have multiple shops across a few cities. They're doing quite well for themselves. And honestly, at the time, no one really knew to do it. Who are these people? They're not really third estate any longer. Third estate is what you usually just thought of, just peasants, and that's it. And now you have this middle class in place, and the nobles don't want to accept them. You're not one of us. So they're just grouped into the third estate. And of course, the bourgeois felt like that was not fair. We control, when it says 20% of the land, that's really the bourgeois that have that. But many of these bourgeois, these middle class, are incredibly rich as far as just cash flow goes. Much more rich than a lot of the nobles. And many of the nobles or aristocracy, they were not too happy about this. Just really quick, I should have this picture up earlier. A viewpoint from the time of this, how this works is, and from medieval times going back 1,000 years, is the first estate and the second estate. First estate represented by the religious figure in the purple. The second estate is the noble in the red, riding on the backs of everybody that represents the third estate, which is the old guy who is the worker, essentially. You know, it's like you are only able to do what you can do because you're riding on the backs of everybody else. So, you know, this is a common kind of theme and mentality leading into the French Revolution that, you know, the third estate's just getting taken advantage of. You know, this isn't fair. And you wouldn't have had this thought process without Enlightenment thinking beforehand. You know, what's fair? How can you make everybody happy? And under a situation like this, people can't be happy. At least the thought process was back then. And by the way, from an American perspective, definitely would agree there. You know, allow everybody essentially their freedom of opportunity. And the state system in France did not allow for freedom of opportunity for most everyone. Okay. Now, little thing I need to go into here is that even though I just talked about how things seemed a little bit unfair or not right, especially from an American point of view, especially from today, and you know, when people's lives are okay, you just deal with it. You complain, yes, but you deal with it. There has to be some major catastrophes or things to come up where people are like, okay, this is it. I can't handle this. You've been so unfair for me forever, and now you're going to get what you deserve type stuff. And that usually comes in times of crisis. Now, I'm going to make a little bit of a segue here, but the time we're living in right now, yeah, there's a big correlation to the time we're living in right now to kind of the stuff I'm going to be talking about leading up into the French Revolution with COVID-19. This is a major crisis, not just state or national. It's a major world crisis. And for my own personal part, I'm both fearful and interested on kind of what will happen on account of this. I'm also hopeful, I must put in there, but based off of my knowledge of history, I can see where things can go if we don't keep a good mind on us, let's put it that way. So let's see what happens with France. You know, they're having problems, but again, without, you know, as long as people are fed, as long as people feel like they're okay, as long as people don't have that fear in their lives of just, you know, how you're going to survive on the next day, usually you just complain about things. But one thing that starts creeping up on the French and had been creeping up on them for a very long time, ever since the reign of Louis the 14th and 13th, basically, or the reigns of Louis the 13th and 14th, 150 years, is extreme bankruptcy. Massive national debt. To the point where they couldn't get loans anymore. The monarchy of France, the bankers just would not lend them any more money. They had too many failed ventures. They were too deep in the pocket. They're like, you need to start paying off your debts. You need to pay us back. We can't afford to give you any more money because then we'll go out of business as well. Like it's just not working. The last loan that they took out to go into a major war was actually to help us out. So from an American perspective, help us as in the United States out. From an American perspective, like, well, thank you for taking that last loan and going into extreme bankruptcy, because without the French help, we wouldn't be a country. We needed their help. Hopefully you know your U.S. history, but they were incredibly helpful and needed at the Battle of Yorktown, which was considered the major battle to win the War of Independence against the British, especially the French Navy. But that was one war that they actually, in a way, won, you know, along with the American colonists. But most of the wars that we talked about, the age of absolutism, they lost in the end. And so they're just basically that, along with their lifestyle, meaning the lifestyle of the nobility, what we call a Versailles style of life. Remember the Palace of Versailles we talked about last unit. You know, to upkeep this way of like, oh, this is the way we're supposed to live. I'm supposed to have all this type of stuff, all this type of food and clothing and makeup and stuff like that. I have to have it, and I'll go into debt to keep it. Like, this is dangerous stuff. But again, they go more and more and more in debt. The country's going into debt. Individual aristocrats are going into debt. um, to upkeep things, and things just seem normal. Things just seem normal. Again, this is one of those things that I look at with the United States right now and the massive debt we're in. And I can't help but make those correlations. You know, it's not all the same, and that's at least some positive note there. But it still freaks me out sometimes. Anyways, but it seems like everything's good, but you had that massive debt. In comes, by the way, there was one area of wealth that they could have tapped into, but for a long time, the first and second estates were exempt from paying taxes. Only the third estate had to pay taxes. I should have talked about the last slide. If you want to talk about unfair, that is unfair. So, in comes the major crisis that just brings the house of cards falling down. There was a major famine in 1788. You know, it's one thing just to say everything's fine as long as everybody has enough stuff, but now here's a point where no one has anything, especially food, one of the most basic necessities. Let's put it this way. With the famine, basically what it was is France was not able to grow or get enough food to feed all of its people this year. I can't remember exactly what happened. I should have looked this up. I apologize, but you can if you'd like to, the causes of the famine. But there's a famine in 1788, notice 1 year before the French Revolution. And basically it causes the peasants to want to revolt. Normally honest people turn to thievery and violence to try to support their families. If anybody here knows the story of Les Miserables, Jean Valjean, the protagonist, I guess the hero of the story. In the beginning, he is someone who gets thrown into prison for stealing a loaf of bread. That's the year. That's when he steals a loaf of bread. He's trying to feed his family, doesn't know how to do it, so he breaks into a shop, steals some bread, gets caught and thrown into prison for decades. And misses the revolution, actually, because he's in prison the whole time. Anyways. But here's the crisis. They don't have food, and here's the worst part. Normally, you go into debt. If you don't have any money, you go into debt some more to buy food from other places. Other countries, essentially. But France is so far in debt, nobody will loan them anything because, hey, we can't trust it. We know you're in a bad spot, but, you've always been in a bad spot. At some point, you got to pay the piper at some point, and this is where the King of France is being told to pay the piper. So King Louis XVI is in a bad situation at this point. And so he decides to convene something called the Estates General. Now, he wants to do good by his people. For all intents and purposes, from the records we have and just the things that were done, you can tell Louis XVI is wanting to get through this. But he still wanted to get through this with his power intact. He does feel like he has divine right. He feels like God has meaning for him to solve the situation. So the Estates General convenes, and the Estates General is essentially an assembly of representative of all the estates. And it's kind of hard for the king to just force everybody to do stuff, although I guess he could if he had enough army. But here he's like, I need everybody to work together on this one. I hope they can agree to want to help the country out. So he calls everybody together. But here's one thing about the Estates General. The Estates General, yes, has hundreds of representatives there, like the picture you see there, but each estate gets one vote. So all the representatives of the first estate gets one vote. All the representatives of the second estate gets one vote. And all the representatives, which is a heck of a lot more than the first two estates of the third estate, gets one vote. Hopefully that picture I just brought up there kind of helps you understand that. So there's only 3 votes that can get cast at this, even with hundreds of people. Now, from our point of view, from American point of view, it's like, that's dumb. Why would you do that? That's not representation of the people. And many of the people there would agree. Even members of the first and second estate were actually very Enlightenment style type of guys, and this is wrong. We should be doing things different. Now, they were talked down by the other people in their estates, like, how dare you? You're going to ruin our power. But anyways, so that's how this works. So Louis XVI goes along with it and essentially says, all right, hey, nobility, clergy, you guys don't get taxed. It's been a long time. Would you guys please allow yourselves to get taxed this one time? Please allow yourself to get taxed this one time. It won't be permanent, and this way we'll be able to buy food for everybody and won't go through massive peasant revolts and rebellions, and we'll actually save money this way because we don't have to pay for armies and things like that. How does the voting go? It gets voted down by the first and second estate. Like, no, we don't want to get taxed, and of course we control the vote because we have 2 votes against the 1, and they vote this down. And Louis XVI is a bit perplexed about this. Third estate isn't too happy about this, but they decide. I should have written this in here, but I felt like it was too much writing stuff into a PowerPoint. But the second estate, I believe it was, then proposes, we think that taxes should be raised on the third estate. They're already paying 30-40% of the taxes, all the taxes. Let's raise taxes on them. And those bourgeois, they don't deserve their lives. It's okay to take more money from them, those little shopkeepers. They don't, they can pay more money, so we can have our lives. And they have a vote on that, and they vote yes, let's raise taxes. Third estate is pissed. Like, all those representatives, which is a majority of representatives that are just pissed. But a lot of them came thinking, hey, maybe we can switch things up. So they propose an idea, say, hey, we'll see how this goes. They propose an idea that every delegate should get a vote. Of course, would turn power to the third estate because they have the most delegates. And of course, what happens here? It gets voted down by the first and second estates. There's no way they're going to give up that power. So the third estate says, all right, screw y'all. And they just leave. And this puts the whole States General and the king in a very dire predicament. All of a sudden you have the entire group body representatives that represents the people you're trying to tax and represents essentially the mood of the people just walking out. Yeah, that could foment some massive rebellion. So Louis XVI actually says, all right, he locked him out at first, saying, if you're going to be this way, stay out there. He's like, oh, crap. Hey, guys, first and second estate, if you guys don't realize what's going on here, we're screwed. We need to go join them. And so it just so happens that Louis XVI actually starts shuffling out the first and second estate members to go to where the third estate had gone to, because they didn't leave Versailles. This is all being done at Versailles, by the way, the Palace of Versailles. They actually go to the tennis court, the building that is the tennis courts. Yes, they have tennis back then. And they are starting to basically start a new government for France. They're just saying, screw it. We represent most of the people. We can make a new government. We want a new government anyways. We want to base it off Enlightenment ideals. The United States did it, so we can do it too. And they formed something called the National Assembly in this tennis court. And the entire goal of the National Assembly is to form a constitution. And each of them takes an oath that they will not leave the tennis courts until they come up with a new French constitution. This kind of story is a story that can definitely resounds with Americans, by the way. We kind of like, yay, way to go, way to get your own constitutional convention going type thing. Hope it goes well for you. So the first and second estate comes in and they take the oath as well. So by doing that, they essentially take away their own power. All of a sudden, the States General is no more, and pretty much the now ruling body, in a way, I shouldn't say ruling body, but the future ruling body of France is going to be this National Assembly, which is still made up of representatives of the first, second, and third estates. Although in a way you could say the estates have now been abolished because of this tennis court oath. So I'm going to end the video at this point and start for the next one, because everything I've talked about at this point is stuff that's leading up to the revolution. Notice I haven't said anything like the revolution has begun at this point. It hasn't necessarily. In a way you could say, well, the tennis court oath seems like something like a beginning of a revolution, kind of like the Declaration of Independence for the United States. But not really. I'm going to start off in the next part of this lesson, the next video, talking about the beginning of the French Revolution, what happens there. That being said, I'll see you in the next lesson.